We're now on the Mishnah on Daf Tzadiches Amid Beis, one of the longest Mishnayos in Shas. It'll take us pretty much to the end of the Amud and almost to the end of the parak. Chabura sha'avad pischa. So you have a group of people that are joined together as in one single unit as a minui on a Korban Pesach, but the Korban Pesach got lost. The Amrli Echad, so they turned to one of the members of the Chabur. Say ubakesh, go out and maybe you'll find the Korban Pesach. Ushchot olenu, and if you find it, shecht it on our behalf. Holach umatza v'shachat. He found, successfully located the Korban Pesach, and he shechted it for himself and for them. However, they were very nervous. They didn't know that he would find the Korban Pesach. And in the meantime, Heim Lachu, they took a different lamb, v'shachatu, and they shechted on their own behalf. So now there were two karbanos psachim that were shechted on their behalf. And the din is that you could only be nimna on one Pesach and not on two psachim. So im shalom nishchat harishon, if we clarify that the one that was originally designated and was found was shechted first, then hu ochel mishalo v'hem ochlim imo mishalo. He, the shliach, will eat from this Pesach together with the other members of the Chabura, because he was shechting that korban on their behalf as their shliach. They were all manu at the time of the shechita, but now they can't be manu on the second korban Pesach, so the second one has to be burnt like a korban Pesach below bailing. The im shalahem nichchat mishal, but if on the other hand their korban Pesach was brought first, then in such a case, heim ochlin mishalahem, v'hu ochel mishalo. In other words, he never became part of their minui on the second Pesach. In other words, he was totally unaware of the fact that they took a substitute. He thought they were relying on him. And he's money on the one that he found and he shechted, so he was yotze with his korban. They, on the other hand, since their korban was shechted first, chronologically, they were yotze with their korban. And in effect, it turns out that they were mosheches yideim from the one that he shechted, even though they were originally manui. But when they took the second korban and they shechted it first, they in effect virtually removed themselves from that original korban. He never removed himself, and he can bring it on his own behalf. So, im shalahem nishchat rishon, heim ochel shalahem, hu ochel mishalem. Now, what happens if we don't know which of the two karbonos was brought first, was shechted first? I'm not exactly sure what that means, that they shechted both of them exactly at the same time. I don't know how you would manage that, but let's say it happened. Is then hu ochel mishalo vehem enam ochlim imo. So again, he only was money on that first korban Pesach, right? So he's yotze with that korban Pesach. That's fine. That's not an issue. However, can the rest of the Chavura join him, right? He was the one who was sent out to find the Pesach, and he did so. They are in a suffix situation. It's very possible that their korban was shechted first, and therefore they were mosheches yideim. They removed their minui from his Pesach. So there's no way that they can join him and eat from the korban Pesach, because it could be they're not even money on the korban Pesach, because there's a possibility that their korban was shechted first. And even the korban that they brought has to be yotze l'beis hasreifa, because it's quite possible that the other korban, which was found by their shliach, was brought first on their behalf, and therefore this second korban is totally meaningless. You can't be money on a second korban Pesach. So therefore, it has a din of a Pesach that like kodshim shenifsalu, and therefore they have to burn that carbon Pesach. But what about Pesach Sheni? Are they chayiv in Pesach Sheni? So the Mishnah is Mechadesh, very interesting, that P'turim last Pesach Sheni, Mimonavshach. They had a minui on an effect on both karbanos. I mean, the only reason why the minui on their carbon is mafkia and undermines the minui on the original carbon is because the original carbon was brought second, but on the side that it was brought first, then they were menuyim on the first, and they were yotze with their chiyuv of carbon Pesach together with the shliach on the first Pesach. And if in event their Pesach came first, they were money on the first Pesach, on their Pesach, which was shechted first. The Monashach, no matter how you slice the cake, they were money on a Pesach, whichever Pesach was brought first. And therefore, they yotze the chiyuv. But we have to add another important point. They won't be able to eat from the carbon Pesach because we're not sure that they're money on that carbon Pesach. But achila enema keves. Even though they can't eat the carbon Pesach, they were yotze the hakrav of the carbon Pesach, and therefore they're potur from Pesach Sheni. The only problem is that back on daf, I don't remember exactly what daf it is, but we had a shita that says the achilas ha-pesach me'akeves. Oh, he writes down in the note, it was daf ein chesam in base, just 10 blot ago. No. Yeah, it's 20 blot ago. So if you hold that Pesach is achilas Pesach ma'akeves, how are you going to learn this Mishnah? The answer is here, everyone agrees that it's not ma'akeves because the Pesach is royal achil. Just he has a suffix, and therefore he doesn't know which Pesach he can eat. He can't eat either of the two Pesach. Now the Mishnah continues. What happens if after the Pesach was lost, and now they sent one of them to look for the Pesach? And he says to them, Im aicharti, if I come late, then Tzu'u v'shachatu, I'll lie. Go out and shech the carbon Pesach on my behalf. In other words, I want to be money in your Pesach because I might not be able to find the Pesach. They never responded. They didn't say to him that if he does find the Pesach, they want him to shech the Pesach on his behalf. So it's a one-way minui. His minui is chal even on the Pesach that they will bring, but they, when they bring their Pesach, will not be manui. They're being misalik themselves from the original Pesach, which is being brought by their shliach. Halachu matzah v'shachat, v'afhem lakhu v'shachatu. He shechted the carbon that he found. They shechted the carbon that they designated as a replacement. Im shalahem nishchat rishon. If their carbon was shechted first, then heim ochlu mishalahem v'gafhu ochel imahem. He will also join them in eating that carbon Pesach because he directed them that if I come late, go ahead and bring a carbon, and I want to be money on that carbon. But the im shalo nishchat rishon, if his carbon was shechted first, and they never instructed him to include them in the minui, is who ochel mishalo. He's money on this carbon Pesach. The heim ochel mishalahem, and the Pesach that they bring subsequently will be their carbon Pesach. They never appointed him as the shliach to shech on their behalf. They were already Moshe Chesideim from that Pesach that was lost. But if he made a yedua ezim nishchat rishon of sheshcho neam kiechad heim ochel mishalahem v'hu eno ochel imayim. Let's see how this works out. They could eat their own carbon Pesach because they were only money on their carbon Pesach. They removed themselves from the original carbon Pesach that got lost. And when that shliach, so to speak, who's not a shliach, right, that yachid we'll call him, when he shech the carbon Pesach, he wasn't doing so as their shliach. So they can only eat from their carbon. V'hu eino ochel imahem. Now he's in a suffix situation because we don't know which Pesach was brought first. And it could very well be that his Korban Pesach was shechted first, and therefore he never was included in their Korban Pesach. V'shalo yetze lebeis hasreifa. He's not going to be able to eat from his Korban Pesach, because it could be that their Korban Pesach was shechted first, and that means that he was moshech es yadav from his Korban Pesach. So therefore there's a 50% chance that his Korban Pesach is completely out. He was never money on that Korban Pesach, because they made him his shliach. No, I'm sorry. He made them his shliach to shecht on his behalf. But nevertheless, potem milasas pesach sheni mimonefshach. Again, he's definitely money on one of these two karbanos. We don't know which one, because we don't know which one was shechted first. But mimonefshach, there was a carbon that was brought on his behalf. He was either money on this one or that one. And achilas pesach eina makepes. Next case. Now we're up to the third scenario in the Mishnah. The Mishnah literally covers every possible scenario. Omar lehem, so the Pesach got lost. They sent one person as a scout to go find the Pesach, and he turns to the Bnei Achabura, and he says that if he comes late, they should immediately shech the Korban Pesach and include him in the Korban Pesach. The Amru Lo, and they also said to him that if he finds the Pesach, he should include them in the Korban Pesach. So therefore, Ochlim Kulam Mina Rishon, they will all eat from the Pesach that was shechted Rishon, because he's their shliach, and they are monui on that Pesach Rishon. And as far as the second Korban Pesach is concerned, they were Moshe Chasideim. But if any yadu ezem em nishchat rishon or shneim, if any yadu ezem em nishchat rishon, is shneim yotzim lebeis hasreifa. Neither of the two karbanos can be eaten. Why? Because they were all of them. They were money on the first karban, and it's very possible, therefore, that the second karban had no bailim on it, because they had appointed him as their shliach to bring the Korban Pesach. He indeed brought the Korban Pesach first, so the second Pesach, the Pesach below bailim, because we don't know which one was shechted first. Now we get to the fourth scenario. Again, the Pesach was lost. One of them was sent as the scout. Lo amar lahem, velo amru lo. They didn't say, we're appointing you as our shliach to shech the Korban Pesach on our behalf. And they indeed brought another Korban Pesach on their own behalf. And he didn't say to them that their Korban Pesach that they're bringing, because they're afraid he won't find one, he should be money on that Korban Pesach. Is enach roim zelazeh. That's wonderful. It's the simplest case of all. No one has responsibility. No one has to tie to one or the other. He's not their shliach. They're not his shliach. Therefore, they'll eat their Korban Pesach. He'll eat his Korban Pesach. Now we get to the next case. Shtei chabur shenis'aru pischeihem. You have two different groups, and there was a mixture of their karbanos before the shechita took place. We don't know who's the bailim on which Pesach. Now, the easiest thing that theoretically, what I'm about to say is wrong, but I'll tell you why it's wrong. The best idea here in this case is that everyone should be Moshech Yodehem from both Pesachim, and they'll each decide which Pesach they want to be part of. In other words, they could, like an etch-a-sketch, they could erase everything and start from scratch again. But that would not let it do. That's not a possibility. The Gemara later on in Daf Tzadi Tes is going to derive this from a pasuk that it's impossible to leave a Korban Pesach without any money on it. there's always got to be someone from the Chabura that's still Manu. We can't just have a situation where the entire Chabura will remove itself from a Korban Pesach. So what do we do in this case? They take one person from each Chabura and he will have a brand new minu. So let's see how the Mishnah formulates it. Elu moshrim lahem echad. In other words, one of these two chaburos will grab on to one Korban Pesach of this taroves. The elu and the other chabura moshrim lahem echad, they'll take the other Pesach. And echad mi elu, and again, it's going to go in both directions, but one person from, let's call it Chabura Aleph, will separate from that Chabura, Bolo Tzalelo, and he'll go over to the Chabura Beis, and he'll join Chabura Beis, and the same thing in the reverse, Echad Me'elu, and someone from Chabura Beis, Bolo Eitzel Elu, will come to the Chabura Aleph, and when they do that, the Kach Heim Omer, here's what they declare. Each one of the two chaburas. If when we designated a specific behem of this tarot, shalonuhu hapesach hazeh, that's the one that we were money on. In other words, we just by luck got it right. I mean, it's a 50% chance, so we got it right. Is then yodecha meshuchos mishalcha v'nimnes al shalonu. Come back to join our chabura, right? You pulled out of our chabura to join the other one. Well, you know what? If we get lucky and we'll shech the original Korban Pesach as we designate it, then you can join us or rejoin us in that chabura. Is yodecha meshuchos mishalcha v'nimnes al shalonu. V'im shalchahu hapesach hazeh. And if when we grabbed on and designated one particular animal, we got it wrong, we didn't get the original one that we had designated on, then shalchahu hapesach hazeh, let this Korban Pesach that we now designated for ourselves be yours, because we, in effect, took the Pesach that belongs to the second Chabura. Now you're part of the second Chabura, and Yodenu Mishuchos Mishalanu, V'nimnu Al Shalcha. And now we are going to pull out of our Pesach, and as a result, we're going to allow this carbon to be designated for the other Chabura. And now we're going to take over your minu. So I have a little bit of a summary here of this part of the Mishnah. I'll read it to you. He says, Nimtza, Af im hechlifu achaburus es pischeim. If when they chose, each Chabura chose and designated a Pesach, they made a mistake and they made a swap, is Kol Chabura Stalka, Mea Pesach Shehi Bershusa Tchila. Each one removes itself, each Chabura, from the original Pesach that they had designated. And now they become Monui on the Pesach that they now took into their domain, so to speak. Ubekach Kol Chabura Menuya Rak Al Pesach Shebersusaata. Each Chabura is now Monui on this Korban Pesach that they took now. But the only way they could do this is that one from each Chabura will join the other Chabura. So therefore, Liolam Nishar Pesach of Bailam, because again we can never leave the Pesach without any Bailam. So there was always at least one Bailam on the Korban Pesach. She'ima chaburos biruas hapesach shalahem nivta shekol chaburos shekol echem eptachim minu yolav. That's fine. Chutz mi'echad she'over lechabura shniya. That's fine. He jumped ship to the other chabur. But if the chabur's made a mistake, Halach echad mikol chabur chabur acheres. So since each one of each chabur reciprocally joined the other chabur, there was always one person minimum who was money on the Pesach. Also echad nishar bailim olav. And when they remove themselves from that Pesach, he himself still remains a bailim on that Pesach. So as I said before, there's always guaranteed one bailim on the Pesach. Then the Mishnah continues, V'chein chamesh chaburas shel chamisha chamisha. The same thing is going to apply in principle if you have 5 different chaburas. Each chabur is made up of 5 members that are manu, or 10 asora. Each chabura has 10 members of the chabura, and the various lambs got mixed up. What we're going to do is each one of these chaburas is going to designate one person. Moshkim echad b'kol chabura v'chabura, and again, one person from each one of the 5 chaburas is going to be designated for a different karban, and v'cheinem omrim, and they're going to say exactly what we said before, what the bnei chabura say one to the other. Sheba etzel mechabura acheres. Here too, in each chabura, they're going to say 4 out of 5 of them remain with this particular karban, and if this Pesach is their Pesach, that's fine. And the one who dropped out, he joined a different chabura, and vice versa. Finally, the Mishnah concludes, what happens if there are only 2 people? There's Ruvain and there's Shimon. And their 2 psachim were confused. He got mixed up together. So Zeh, let's call him Ruvain. Ruvain mochech lo echad, he'll choose one Pesach and designate it for himself. V'zeh and Shimon mochech lo echad, he'll designate it as his korban Pesach. Now, we're in trouble over here because if each one was misalik himself from his own korban Pesach, then that means that Pesach had no bailim. So what do? Zeh Ruvain mimana imo echad min hashuk. Ruvain is going to invite, let's call it Levi, to join him, and they're going to make a declaration that kol mokum to a Pesach chali arei ata nimne olam. Whichever Pesach is mine, Ruvain says, you, Levi, will join me on that Pesach. V'zen Shimon will make a declaration of Amana Imo Echem min Hashuk. He'll choose Yehuda, and he'll say again, wherever my Pesach is, you and I, meaning Shimon and Yehuda, both money on the korban Pesach. And then it turns out, in the calculation, that Ruvain and Levi are money on one Pesach, wherever it is. Shimon and Yehuda are money on the other Pesach, whichever one it is. We don't know which ones it is. And therefore, in this case, we don't know if the Pesachim that they now designated really belong to Ruvain and this one to Shimon. Or maybe they made a swap. Is Zeba Eitzel Zeh, Ruvain comes to his Pesach. And this was the Pesach that, let's say, Shimon designated. So Ruvain and Yehuda, who are now, now we said that, let me get the name straight, that Shimon and Yehuda are now together. And Shimon now comes to the Pesach that has both Ruvain and Levi on it. The Kachem Omrim, they make the following declaration. And this is what Ruvain is going to say to Yehuda, and Shimon is going to say to Levi. Im shaliu Pesach zeh. And when they were moshchem es Pesachim, they didn't clarify exactly. They didn't actually come up with the right Pesach, and that was not the Pesach that they were money on together with their friend. Is Yodecha Meshuchos Mishalcha V'nimnes Al Shali. Then you should remove your minui from your Korban Pesach and join my Korban Pesach. V'im Shalcho Pesach Zeh. But if when we designated each, respectively, each Pesach, we got it right, and I got my Pesach, and my friend got his Pesach, so the Pesach now, Shal Chaveri, is who him that Oscha love, is Yadai Meshuchas Mishali v'nimnes al Shalcha. Honor Rabbanah, the Gemara says, Amru lahem, v'amru lo, that in the case of a Chabur that lost its Pesach, and one went out to look for it, and he says to them that if I come late, they should be his shliach, and they should include him on the Korban Pesach. The Amrulo, and so too reciprocally they said that if he finds the Pesach, he should be their shliach and shechted on their behalf. Is ochel, the shliach, and every one of the other bnei chabura can eat from the mina richon, from the Pesach richon shenichkat, and the second one will have to be burnt. Lo amru the lo amru lo, if they just simply parted ways, no one made a shliach to anyone. So each one will eat his own Korban Pesach. And here we turn to the Afsadi test. We're going to derive sort of like a moral, ethical rule over here, because if they said one to the other that they should be shluchim, then they all are committed to eat the Korban Pesach that was shechted first, and the next Korban Pesach is going to be burned. But if they didn't say anything, then it's great, because each one will eat from his Korban Pesach, the Bnei Chabur will eat from their Korban Pesach. And if shtika is the best idea, silence is golden for the wise people, kal v'chomer how much more so the tipchim, for those who don't have control over their mouth. Shenemar, as Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, Gam avil macharish chacham yechashem. Even a tipesh, if he's smart enough to be silent, that much intelligence he has, then that's not stupidity. We can call him at least a chacham for this silence. Now the Mishnah says, Shnayim shenis arvu pischeihem. Izem eishalacho echad v'zem oshacho echad. And zem mana imo echad min hashuk. V'zem mana imo echad min hashuk. Zem batzel tel zeh. V'zem batzel zeh. And then they say, Im shaliu pesach zeh. Is yodecha meshuchos mishalcha v'nimnes al shali. Im shalcha pesach zeh. Is yadai meshuchos mishali v'nimnes alecha al shalcha. So the Gemara says, Lema masnisin delo ki Rabbi Yehuda. Should we assume that this mission is against Rabbi Yehuda? And now we learn a brisa which records a machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef. And it all revolves around how to interpret the pasuk of Minu. The Torah says in Yemayit habayis miyoseh, and it says im Yemayit. What does that teach us? Now we're going to start with Rabbi Yehuda Shita. Malamed shemismatin v'holchim, that if the Menuyim decide that they want to reduce the number of people on the Minui by being Moshech Yatzma min Pischon from their Pesach, ubilvache echad mibnei chabura kain. They can only do so if it's a Yemite situation, means they're reducing the number of people of Manui, but nevertheless, there's still a minimum of one person who's still money on the Pesach. And that's what we're going to derive from Im Yemite. Rabbi Yossi says you can reduce it even if there's not even one person left in the original Chabura that's money on the Pesach. Bilvad shelo yaniach es haPesach kamo shehu. In other words, if all the members of the first Chabura want to be Moshech Yedeim, they want to rescind and remove themselves from the Pesach, then what they should do is they should first appoint others to be on the Pesach, to be money on this Pesach, so that the Pesach will not be left without bailim, without any bailim. But the Torah was not makbid that they leave members of the original chabura, at least one member, like Rabbi Yehuda insists. And now, since we go back to our Mishnah, the Mishnah says that Shnei Yechidim, Shenis'aru Pischem, you have Reuven and Shimon, and their karbanos respectively got mixed up, is each one has to appoint someone from the Shuk. Reuven has to appoint Levi, and Shimon has to appoint Yehuda. And it means that if they'll make it tonight, that if there was a swap, if there was a hechlifu pischayim, is yodam mishuchas v'pesach zeh, v'hu nimna al pischo shall also shabam min ashuk. Right, so he'll now join that person. Let's call him Levi, who came from the shuk. Now it's a possibility that they let the Korban Pesach without any Bailam Rishonim. And Rabbi Yehuda could not tolerate such a situation. Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara says, no, that's not a problem. Afilu Teim Rabbi Yehuda, we can still reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Yehuda. His came on the Omer Rabbi Yehuda. There was a Mishnah that we had later on, early on in Daf Tzadi Aleph, that Ein Shochtim Es HaPesach Ala Yochid. We never shech the Korban Pesach for one person. There has to be always a minimum of two people in the Chabura. And now we have a situation where two Yechidim, like Reuven and Shimon, were each manui on one Pesach. So there's only one person manui on one Pesach. Is therefore each one of them is made kara the mnuyachrini b'hadayu koi. When they were mafish the Korban Pesach, they knew it was omed lakach that they would be mamana somebody else. And even if their pesachim had not gotten mixed up one with the other, since according to Rabbi Yehuda it's impossible, the Torah doesn't allow for one person to be money on a Pesach, they have no choice but to assume they're going to find someone else from the shuk who's going to join them in the minui of the Korban Pesach. He can't be alone. And therefore, when let's say Reuven brings in Levi from the shuk, it's ki echad mibnei chabura dam. They're all considered to be one bnei chabura from the original bnei chabura. And therefore, even if the Yachid will remove himself from his Pesach and join a different group, umismana al Pesach shosa shabam and ashuk, it's still considered as if there's one from the Bnei Chabur Rishona that's still money on them, because again, since the original plan was that they would join a second person. Rav Ashi Masnisinami Deka, he wants to support this interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan in our Mishnah. And he says the following. The Ketani, it says in our Mishnah, V'chein chamesh chabur shel chamisha, that each one of these chaburos should be divided up into 5 pesachim, and they're going to create 5 new chaburos. And in each chabura, one of the bnei chabura will join from the original chabura, and every 4 people representing each one of the chaburos will make a t'nai with the 5th person that was part of that chabura, that if the Pesach that they designate is his Pesach, then they're going to remove themselves from their Pesach, and they're going to join his Pesach. So we're going to be medayik from the lashon of the Mishnah that afka only in this case that all the chaburas were shel chamisha anoshim. They were made up of 5 people in. Then we have this takana, we have this possibility by dividing up the bnei chabura amongst the 5 pesachim. Aval, but implying haya. If there was only 5 yarba, in other words, if in one of the chaburos there were only 4 members of that chabura, and therefore they don't have enough people to be machalek in order to cover the other 4 chaburos, because if they're going to leave one, they only have 3 left. Lo. So why is that so? Lav mishum de lav fayish chad mibnei chabur gabe. Shouldn't we assume that's because there's no one single person from the Bnei Chabur Rishon who's money on Al Pesach, which again reflects the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. That since in a case of a Chabur of 4 people, they can only divide up amongst 4 Pesachim, there's going to be, in this case, since there's going to be Chamesh Chaburos, 5 new groups, and in 4 of them there are 5 people, so that one person from each Chabura of the original Chabura, and in the 5th Chabura there are only 4 people from 4 Chaburos, so they don't have one from that Chabura who was originally amongst the 4 people. We have to be choshesh that perhaps the Pesach now, in the hands of the 5th Chabura, maybe that's the Pesach that was originally made up of a Chabura of 4 people. Happy the case, it's anal of Bailan. Because even if the Chabura that was there from the beginning as 4 people would add to it somebody, they would take someone from the Shuk, and then they would divide up into 5 groups. That's not going to be meaningful. Why? Sharei im al pischa yeh chabura chadosha v'nimtzu ba'otzo echem min hashuk. If on this Korban Pesach, made up of a minui of chabura chadosha, it includes one of the people that they invited who was not part of the chabur originally. Therefore, afli achar she'ismana olav, even after he becomes manui, lo yishar olav minui echad. And according to Rabbi Yossi, the first Chabura, which is made up only of 4 people, they could take someone from the Shuk and be mamanim on their Pesach, no matter where their Pesach is. They don't know which one it is. And it turns out that each Chabura has 5 people, and they can divide up into 5 groups by inviting someone from the Shuk, because Rabbi Yossi never required that they remain on one Pesach, one on the Pesach, one of the Menuyim, who was there at the time that they originally purchased the Pesach. He was only mocked that there shouldn't be at the end of the day a Pesach without any bailing. And from the Mishnah, that was B'dafka chose the case of 5, and not 5 and 4, but 5 times 5. It implies that the Chabur has to be made up of 5 and not 4. And if it was only 4, there's no takana, and that would reflect the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Shmamina, Hajan Alecha, Mishneh Yatome, Likole, Pesach, Ein.